Hello. I will begin with this, that I'm having this trouble because I should begin with something substantive, but Łukasz already stole the show a bit. But at the very end, I do have a presentation about details. So as far as business matters are concerned, I will leave it to the end of the day. But right now, with great pleasure, I would like to invite you to the next session. And this is going to be a case study that was done by us and is being still run by us at BIOTON. And Adam Hatak, head of IT at BIOTON, is going to talk about it. Yes, a round of applause. And Marcin Victor, who is hiding. He is a PM, a project manager at WEBCON. And we started cooperation with Adam in 2015. Those were some minor consultancy assignments, but then in 2016 we ran our first joint project in a traditional form. There was a waterfall form, but then it turned out that that cooperation could be run in a bit different mode, because Adam takes decisions very quickly. He is a very specific person, very practical person. Therefore, the relations with our company is a very partner-like relation, and we decided to change the way we're running these projects. So we switched from waterfall projects to a faster mode of action, and this is how we deliver applications for business. And this is due to that we can work faster. We don't have to be drowned by documentation. And how we do it, and why are we successful? This is something that Adam is going to talk about. And the presentation has a very unusual title. Do we need it? Over to you. Hello. Do you hear me well? Right. And the best thing to have is a presentation right before lunch. Therefore, try not to talk too long, but I will speak fast. And I'll try to go through this presentation as fast as possible. Let's run. So, do we need it? And this is the topic that we have prepared. And let us begin with BIOTON. What is BIOTON? And some of you might know this company because somehow this company has good recognition. We have had a PR of sorts. And BIOTON is a biotech company. It was established in 1989. And our basic product, that is our core business, this is the RHI, that is recombinant human insulin. And this is where I put a full stop, because you might think that I'm a specialist in the insulin things as an IT head. But what I can tell you, that this insulin is the most human insulin that is generated by human pancreas. So if you're interested in that, have a look at Google, and Google will tell you more about that. As far as I'm concerned, that's it. But in 2005, the company was listed, and since 2005, we have been listed at the Warsaw Stock Exchange. As for now, we have 600 personnel. That is the manufacturing site, and in our offices not far from Warsaw. And this is the site where we actually work. Just a few points about me. I've been at BIOTON for 2 years, more or less. I have 10+ years of experiences in IT. They say 10+, so not to show that it's even more than that, so it's 10+ years of experience in IT. With WEBCON, I have been cooperating for 5 years, so I've been thinking about it. It's actually more than 5 years now, if we take into consideration the first telephone call and the first contact I had, which is a bit of history. And there are two companies that use two companies at BIOTON that use WEBCON, so no one regretted using WEBCON yet, so fine, this is here to stay. Right. Now, where is it that WEBCON is used at BIOTON? You might guess correctly, and you simply know that pharmaceutical business is a very hermetic type of business. It's kind of very strictly regulated kind of industry by external regulators. So a lot of information cannot leave the company. It's kind of a fortress, and every pharmaceutical company treats any knowledge as know-how. And we use WEBCON in such areas as finance. And here, this is purchase-to-pay processes. So from the point of view of purchase decision to the settlements, and Marcin is going to talk about it. It's simple administrative processes, such as visits paid by guests, registration of guests. Now, quality processes that are regulated by external authorities, ISO documentation and other types of quality-related documentation. Commercial, that is the approval of price lists, changes in prices. This is all digitalized. Simple occupational health and safety processes and managerial processes. And here I can give you one fine example, nice example. We call it Polaris process. And it is about project management, something like in Warbut. But the beauty of it is that it's become part of the purchase to pay process. So we don't say what we buy, we say why we buy it. It shows nice synergy, and it shows how we can combine different processes at WEBCON. Right. Now, how about the beginnings? How did we begin? Ola has spoke about movement from waterfall to crazier processes, and I have already had some experience in my previous company, so I thought, right, we can follow suit, and it befitted the corporate culture quite well. So we thought, right, let's first do the easy processes that will be easy to adapt. Once, if we handle a big process, it will require learning curve, and therefore implementation will be lengthy. There will be training, there will be documentation, there will be many other things. But if we run initially some simple processes, then the users will learn about the system, learn about the interface, and will know about its possibilities. But then the next thing, the simple processes that we shall develop as lone islands, they may be combined and integrated. And that was the bottom-up approach. So the staff would come and say, how about combining those two islands together? So we thought it was a really cool thing to have. And since the very beginning, we were focused on the integration of already existing solutions. And then another point is our attitude to processes, because we say we need to change processes, but we are not changing the processes through WEBCON. WEBCON is merely a tool that helps us to change processes, but this is how we may have a different philosophy, different attitude to processes in the company. It's a new organizational culture, and this is something that could be done right from the very beginning. Another very important point, we were really very much supported by the board of the company, management board of the company. There were many conflicts inside the organization, and all of those conflicts were solved at the board level, and then we could go on. Now, as far as difficulties are concerned, so this is what we had to, those are the challenges we had to face. Initially, it's very difficult to engage the users in the beginning, because users would always say no to any change in the beginning to begin with. They just don't like changes, never want to cooperate. But once we coax them, and once we invite them to a meeting, and once we start talking, then they open up. They start writing letters to Santa Claus, as we call it. It's a long wish list. It's a long list of desires without any idea how to do that. They simply say, those are the things we need, and then they say, fine, but maybe not now, maybe later. But then, listen, we have even autonomous cars these days. Why don't we have some newer solutions? So in the beginning, there were conflicts. Let's take a small step in the beginning, then another step, and then another step. And the challenge was that initially people were afraid of changes, and they say, "But it has always been the other way, the old way. Why do you need to change?" And their answer was always we don't need to change because we are already used to the old ways. We don't want the new ones. And another problem we faced a lot, and it also, as far as our processes are concerned, the digitalization is not an end in its own right. It's not about changing from paper to digit. We need to think, is it good? It's not about just replacing paper with electronics. But many times people will come in and saying, "Yeah, but it's enough for me to have digital and it will be just fine for me." No, it's not enough. Our goals are more far-reaching. It's digitalization and optimization at the same time. Now the question is, that's the principal question for this presentation, do we need this process? That's the principal question we ask. And right from the very onset of our cooperation with WEBCON, we started asking the question, do we need that process? Do we actually need that process at all? Do we need it in this company? And if we say yes, then the next question would be how to simplify it. And then we would think, right, this is how we can simplify it. Or does this process correspond to the need of an organization? And do other people who are involved in a given process are the people who need to be involved in this process? Because maybe we have surplus personnel. Another question, who is the owner of the process? And it was not always clear. It wasn't always clear whether that person is the process owner. And the last question to ask in this presentation, should this process be handled by WEBCON? So it's this Pareto principle, 80-20, because we do not want to put everything into WEBCON just for the sake of it. So maybe if something is a process is there only twice a year, why should we do it in WEBCON? But if the answer was negative and the process was considered to be not necessary, it was thrown into the waste bin and we never returned to it. Just cut off, throw away, and forget. Now, how about simple processes, and how can we do processes simple? Well, first, due to that, there would be a short time to market, a time to business, which means that such a process may be handed over to the organization in a very short period of time. Also, if it's a simple process, it's easily implementable. Once people understand it, people use such a process eagerly. So there is no energy or time invested in the explanatory work. We do realize, though, that simple processes are not perfect, are not always perfect, or can never be perfect, but already in the initial phase, they're quite helpful to the users, new users. So that's already beneficial. And with that, we can say that the users become initiators of changes. And if the fire is maintained, people start addressing their ideas themselves, and they run those processes themselves. And if this is a simple process, it may be integrated with others or developed. So we begin small, and then, depending on how business develops, depending on how environment changes, we can react faster to changes that are taking place. And we are not generating a lot of documentation or analysis, which is so time-consuming and money-intensive, because we're quite agile and in our operations, and some people say we're a bit crazy. Next thing, fail fast. Something that I heard last year at WEBCON Day. I like this idea, fail fast. Fail fast, which means that if I am to fail, let's fail as soon as possible, because then the cost of failure is going to be the lowest possible cost. And how about startup way? This is what I add, because it's linked together. So we try to be a company that functions as if it were a startup. So we try this idea, works, fine. If not, drop it, move on. So if the milk was spilled, don't cry over it. Just keep on going. Keep calm and keep working. And how about our cooperation with WEBCON? Well, what is nice that it's 100% remote work. Marcin, I met him in the virtual world a long time ago, but today we met and shook our hands. So 100% remote work, and none of WEBCON has ever visited BIOTON, which was pretty nice that we could run it that way. And also this flexible approach is quite nice. There were some processes that we started doing ourselves. I did a little bit of clicking myself, but once the process started growing and it was no longer that easy, then I was handing it over to WEBCON and saying, you guys do it now because I have no ideas, I ran out of ideas, and there was no problem. So I simply would hand over a process to WEBCON and they would develop it onwards, which was nice. And also the involvement of the WEBCON team. And here I do pay my honors, because many times it was WEBCON calling us and asking us the question, have you made it? Shall we go on? Have you tested? And we say, right, tomorrow, give us more time, and so on and so forth. So they were motivating us to take action. And I think that this is also a key factor, because why WEBCON in BIOTON is a very successful company. So, yes, thank you for that a lot. So, to sum up, as far as WEBCON and BIOTON are concerned, first and foremost, processes are plain simple. If you are to make a mistake, do it fast, fail fast. Also, we were very much supported by the management board. Changes. That is a constant. That is the certain thing that you have in your life, that there always is going to be a change. Let us not be afraid of changes, because a change is something certain. Change is going to happen. And I personally believe that perfect processes simply do not exist. But if we begin small, we can perfect those small processes, and being imperfect initially, then in 2 years later, we will come up to a stage when those processes will no longer be necessary and we'll have to change processes anyway. And I also would like to sincerely thank WEBCON team for their support and cooperation. We could not have done it without them. Thank you. Thank you. Adam spoke about the implementations, and I'm going to focus on that process that he has mentioned, this application P2P, which is procure to payment. That is from the requisition, purchase order, and invoice. So this is a set of 4 core processes, and they are also supported by a number of supportive applications. For instance, adding a new counterparty, prepayment, and some other minor applications. Sometimes they're present, sometimes they aren't, depending on the situation. And the core of this application, that is the requisition, the PO, and the invoice, they were done with agility, but not chaotically. So iteratively, we were developing all 4 processes by collecting feedback from users, from persons who use the system on an everyday basis, and with every iteration, we were developing it further on. And currently, the system is quite developed. There's been a number of iterations. And right now, we have only 2 small processes, but this is something that we are doing quite quickly. And if I were to speak in a few months from now, we would have many more modules presented on the slide. And what this agile attitude mean, and why there is no chaos. There is agility, but there is no chaos. Some things need to be minded to achieve success. First, we focus on business needs. So we do not implement something that is redundant, not necessary. So, for instance, if there is an invoice and this is a very highly complex invoice, but it appears only once or twice a year, then we say, right, this is a special case, but it is less significant, therefore we can handle that process in the future, or we don't handle it at all, because there are other more useful functions that we need to run right now. Another success factor this is the incremental approach, and it doesn't work that we sit down and we start clicking without having any ideas what to design, because chaotic approach doesn't work.
So what do we rely on? We sit down, a number of people, and we define whether the process is needed. If so, why, and what would be needed to improve it, namely to shift from paper to digital. And also priorities need to be ascribed to tasks. Easier said than done, because one could say everything is necessary and we need it overnight, but it's simply impossible to implement. That is why our approach allows us to identify the most needed things that need to be deployed relatively soon, and which tasks are simply committed to memory or written down, and we'll see after a few months whether we still need them. And you need to collect feedback from business. The system is expanded, new functionalities are added, and you will get feedback from people that work with it on how it works or how it should work. You need to collect that feedback, and it was actually mentioned in the previous presentation. People, when they see that their feedback is taken on board, they simply find it easier to work with the system. A continuous and clear communications. Now, how can you understand that? Yes, the communication between us and BIOTON needs to be continuous and clear. Secondly, in BIOTON, you have a single point of contact for any given issue. I did not find a good corresponding phrase in Polish, unfortunately. So, you have a function. You don't know how to approach it. You don't really understand it. And the previous way didn't work out. You know whom to approach. And this person is empowered, so they don't need to consult a dozen people. In a few hours, they can get back to you and tell you whether you do it this way or not. The same would be true about technical things. Two approaches have been mentioned, the traditional one and the agile one. What's the difference between the two, though? The traditional approach. Theoretically, it is described as big design up front. You analyze everything and anything, describe it all. Both parties know what needs to be delivered, what it's supposed to look like. The expectations are defined. And you know exactly the scope. Now, with agile projects, you have EDUF, enough design up front. So naturally, you also need a starting point. You cannot simply start with anything with empty hands. You need to have a good foundation that you're going to build on. But the further scope will be updated on an ongoing basis depending on the ideas that arrive and the requirements that are presented by the environment, or by the surroundings rather. What's the impact? You cannot specify the schedule and budget in detail, because certain tasks may be deemed outdated, for example, and new may appear. In agile approach, you simply live in short periods of time. The last 2 points, best to show it visually. Why do we do projects? They are supposed to deliver a certain value, benefits to the organization. With traditional projects, whatever you do to analyze it or however you configure everything at a testing server, the server gives no benefit before it's actually deployed. Because it may be perfect, but it's not deployed, so it doesn't work, so it gives no benefits. So benefits are delivered when it's launched. Now, in agile approach, which we pursue in BIOTON, it looks different. What we begin with is the first iteration that's going to work. So you have this minimal version. Most users will ask, come on, how come you deploy with this without A, B, and C? But obviously, we collect that feedback, and once we've been granted permission to do so, we add functionalities. And these functionalities give you business benefits. So the benefits for the organization in such a project appeared quite soon. And then it took a few more months for the major process to be perfected and others to be added, thus boosting the benefits for the users. WEBCON BPS, how does it support such agile implementations? Instant changes will be covered at length, not going to add anything to that. I will tell you about two things that are not really visible from the point of view of a user, the person that clicks on a form, but rather from the person that needs to maintain it. First, the rules. Imagine you have processes that are connected in terms of a subject. So you can similarly have certain validation rules, and you need to write it down well. Once you've done that, you can redeploy it or reuse it in other processes. You need to change parameters naturally, but that's it. And you save time. And another function, you can look at all the use locations of a given object in the system. At this point, we don't know what's going to happen and what we're going to do in 2 or 3 weeks' time. So you tend to return to things that have already been implemented. You modify things, you add things, you remove things too. We've all experienced it, I believe, that you return to a path or an attribute, and we've got no idea what it's for and how it's used. And it might explode if you touch it. Yes, you can simply remove it and see whether it's going to explode or not. But you can also click on it and view all the location in the system where this particular path or object is used. And thus, you can avoid such unpleasantries as I've described. Many functionalities available out of the box. Well, you could dedicate a number of slides to cover that. But first, what I'm going to tell you is a few things. First, OCR. You can read data from scanned documents, like invoices. Little work, some configuration, and it can yield you great benefits. Imagine that per year you have thousands of such documents. So a few minutes per document, imagine how much time you can save per year. Hot mailbox. So this functionality is applied the most often when you send invoices to a given email address. When you link it to OCR, you can basically get an invoice from your contractor. You can add the text layer. So you have an email, it arrives in the right address. And then half of the work related to email, or rather invoice description, is already done. Web service, it's about looking at whether a given contractor is a VAT payer or not. The accountants had to do it manually. Now they get an invoice and these accounting people see it immediately, see whether he is a VAT payer or not. Creating independent flows and rewriting data. So it would be a pain in the neck to rewrite the data, creating dependencies, maintaining these dependencies, what impacts what. In BPS, you can do it quite easily. And the last slide that I'm going to present is going to be more generic. Developing new applications on the same platform. It's already been mentioned a number of times here. So yes, you can connect processes easily. On top of that is what matters is that maintenance is simpler and you don't need much training. So you can simply deploy a number of processes, they are taken on board, and any new processes will be easier to introduce because the users already know what it's like, what it looks like, how it works. They know how to find their tasks, how buttons and attributes work, and so on and so forth. So once you've done your homework, you don't need to redo it all with every new project. And dev, test, production environments, it's also good for agile implementations, so you can separate these stages. When it comes to moving, migrating changes, in most cases there will be a number of minutes. So it really works if you introduce changes often, even minor ones. And it's easy to make documentation. I'm not trying to say that documents are generated by themselves. No. What I am trying to say is that every flow in the system can be described. And at times, you have such a scenario that you return to a given attribute after a number of months, and you don't know why it's configured this way. So you can simply describe every and any element in the system. So after a few months, you find it easier to find this information, of course, if you had described it before. What you need to worry about is to describe it well, rather than the form that documentation is going to take, because the system will take care of it. And mind you, these files can be generated quite easily. And that's it from me. Thank you.